Lonely billionaire Daniel Cole gives his credit card to 3 women to test their hearts. 2 splurge on luxury, but his humble maid spends little, using it to help others. Her kindness opens his eyes to what money can't buy: sincerity and compassion. The Billionaire's Test is a heartfelt story of love, humility, and redemption, showing that true wealth lies not in riches, but in a selfless heart. Hey family, welcome to Real Life Heart Stories. Please subscribe and give this video a like. It truly means the world to us. Don't forget to share it with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you never miss a new upload. Thank you so much for the support. Now, sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's story. Rain traced slow silver lines down the tall glass walls of Daniel Cole's penthouse, blurring the glittering city below. From 40 floors up, the world looked peaceful, distant, almost unreal, a place of motion he no longer belonged to. The faint hum of traffic floated through the glass, but inside, everything was still. He sat alone in the half-light, a glass of wine untouched beside him, his phone dimly glowing in his hand. Photo after photo slid across the screen, smiling faces, dinner parties, women dressed in gold and perfume, all claiming affection, devotion, love. Yet every image felt hollow. He leaned back in his chair and whispered to himself, "They love what I have, not who I am." The thought settled heavily in the quiet air. For all his success, the skyscrapers he owned, the private jets, the endless invitations to charity galas, Daniel felt emptier than he had when he'd lived in a one-room apartment with cracked walls and noisy neighbors. Back then, he had friends who called just to talk. Now every call came with a favor. A soft knock broke through the silence. It was Michael, his oldest friend, a man who still wore leather shoes scuffed from the past, the only person who treated him the same before and after the billions. "Still awake?" Michael asked as he stepped inside. "You've been staring at that skyline for an hour." Daniel gave a tired half-smile. "It listens better than most people I know." Michael dropped onto the couch opposite him, glancing at the untouched drink. "Let me guess, Sophia again? Or Clara?" Daniel murmured. "They all say the same thing in different perfume bottles." Michael chuckled, though there was no amusement behind it. "You're looking for something money can't buy. Then maybe I should stop looking in places where money speaks first." A soft rumble of thunder rolled over the city. Daniel's gaze shifted to a framed photo on the table, a younger version of himself standing beside a smiling woman with gentle eyes. His mother. Her words came back to him like a whisper from another life. "Love is proven when you have nothing left to give." He stared at the photo for a long time before finally speaking. "What if I found out who really cares? By pretending I have nothing?" Michael tilted his head. "You're planning another one of your crazy experiments?" "Maybe," Daniel said, a faint smirk forming. "But this one's not for business. It's for my heart." That night, long after Michael left, the storm outside grew fierce. Lightning flashed against the windows as Daniel sat at his desk, typing 3 names onto a blank document: Sophia, Clara, and Amara. Sophia, glamorous, magnetic, always draped in luxury, her laughter loud and practiced. Clara, soft-spoken, graceful, a woman who seemed gentle until you noticed how often she glanced at her reflection. And then there was Amara. She had worked for him for 3 years. A quiet maid who moved through the mansion like a breeze, always there, but never imposing. Her voice was soft, respectful, yet filled with something that neither money nor education could teach: kindness. She never asked for anything, never complained, even when she worked late into the night. She would sometimes hum while cleaning, songs without words, and for reasons Daniel couldn't explain. Those small, nameless melodies always calmed him. He remembered once finding her tending to the flowers in the courtyard after midnight. When he asked why she was still awake, she'd simply smiled and said, "The roses are stronger when they feel cared for, sir. People aren't so different." That memory stayed with him. Now, as the rain whispered against the glass, Daniel leaned back in his chair and said quietly to the empty room, "Tomorrow, they'll all have my card, but only one will have my heart." The storm outside intensified, thunder rumbling through the sky. His reflection stared back at him from the glass wall, a man surrounded by gold but haunted by emptiness. People thought billionaires had everything. But as Daniel sat in his silent kingdom high above the city, he finally understood that when love is uncertain, wealth feels like a curse. The morning came with a strange calmness that wrapped itself around the mansion. The air smelled faintly of rain and polished wood. Birds were chirping somewhere beyond the open balcony. Yet the silence inside the house was heavy, the kind that waits for something to happen. He sat at the long marble dining table, staring at 3 envelopes lying in front of him. Each one carried a name and a card inside his card. The idea had kept him awake all night, the thought of testing love in a world where money spoke louder than hearts. He had given people jobs, gifts, even houses, but never his trust. Now, that single piece of metal in each envelope carried more meaning than any of them could guess. He leaned back, rubbed his temples, and whispered to himself, "Let's see who really cares." The first meeting was at a waterfront restaurant where the sun glimmered across the glass tables and chandeliers. She arrived dressed like a magazine cover red dress, gold heels, confidence painted in every step. The waiter greeted her by name. She'd been there before. Her laughter was loud, her perfume expensive, her smile practiced. When he slid the envelope across the table, her eyes lit up brighter than the crystal glass beside her. "Spend it however you like," he said quietly. She blinked once, then smiled. "You're serious?" He nodded, and just like that, she was already imagining the stores she would walk into. Even before dessert was served, she was on her phone checking boutique hours. By the time she kissed him goodbye, he already knew how the story would end. The second meeting was gentler. The setting, a spa garden filled with jasmine and warm sunlight. The woman sitting across from him spoke softly, with the calmness of someone who always knew what to say. She reached for his hand at the table, eyes wide with surprise as he handed her the envelope. "You're giving me your card?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "For anything you want." Her lips curved into a small smile, the kind that looked grateful but carried a glimmer of calculation. She leaned back, tapping the envelope gently against her palm as if weighing its worth. "You really trust me?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "I'm sure I'll find out." She didn't say much after that, but her silence was loud, a silence filled with possibilities of all the things she could finally afford. By evening, the mansion was quiet again. He found his maid in the study, wiping the dust off the bookshelves. She didn't notice him at first. She was humming softly, her voice barely a whisper. When she turned and saw him standing there, she froze, hands pressed to her apron. "I'm sorry, sir," she stammered. "I didn't know you were here." He smiled gently and handed her the last envelope. She stared at it, confused. "Sir, what is this?" "A gift," he said. "Use it however you wish." Her brow furrowed as she held it carefully, like something fragile. "I can't take this," she whispered. "It's too much." He shook his head. "It's not about the money. Just use it for whatever your heart tells you." For a long moment she didn't speak. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held the envelope to her chest. There were tears in her eyes, quiet, restrained, the kind that come when gratitude is too deep for words. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll use it wisely." As he turned to leave, he glanced back. She was still standing there, staring at the envelope, not in excitement, but in wonder. Unlike the others, she didn't rush to open it. She simply whispered a prayer under her breath. That night, as he stood by his window watching the city lights flicker below, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. 3 envelopes had left his hands that day, carrying the same opportunity, but deep down, he already knew they wouldn't return with the same truth. The next day unfolded like a quiet storm. Nothing seemed different on the surface. Sunlight poured across the city. Cars hummed through the streets, but somewhere beneath the calm, truths were beginning to take shape. In the glittering heart of the city, one of the women began her day in the most familiar place she knew, an upscale boutique lined with mirrors taller than the doorways. Her reflection looked back at her from every angle as she trailed her fingers along rows of silk and sequins. The card slid easily into the cashier's hand, again and again, as though it was born for it. Designer dresses, gold necklaces, shoes that sparkled like diamonds beneath the spotlights. Every purchase felt like a victory, proof that she was adored, that she was chosen. "Wrap them all," she said with a satisfied smile, her voice sharp as the click of her heels. To her, love was something that needed to look expensive to feel real. Across town, another woman lounged in a chair as warm oils dripped down her back and soft music filled the air. Her phone buzzed on the counter beside her, notification after notification, each one confirming another charge on the card. A spa package here, a designer watch there, a weekend reservation at a coastal resort. She took a photo of her hand holding a glass of champagne and posted it with a caption, "Spoiled, loved, and blessed, red heart, #myman, #luxury life." The likes began to pour in instantly. Each heart that appeared on her screen was another reason to believe she was winning. Somewhere in the middle of all that luxury, she smiled to herself, convinced that spending money was her way of showing love in return. But far from the marble floors and chandeliers, on the other side of the city, a third pair of hands held the same card with trembling care. The maid stood before a small wooden stall in the local market, her eyes scanning baskets of fruit and vegetables stacked beneath the morning sun. The sellers greeted her warmly. She was known here. She bought a sack of rice for the old gardener who had been struggling with his wife's hospital bills. She bought a blanket for the little boy who slept near the bus stop, always cold, always smiling through the dust. She stopped by a florist's stand, where the scent of roses and lilies mixed with the smell of rain-soaked earth, and she picked out a simple bunch of flowers, white and soft, like peace itself. When the shopkeeper tried to hand her change, she shook her head and pushed it back with a small smile. "Please," she said gently, "keep it for someone who needs it." By the time she returned to the mansion, the card had barely been touched. It lay light in her hand, almost unused, yet heavy with meaning. She placed it quietly on the study table, beside a fresh vase of flowers and a small folded note that simply read, "Thank you for trusting me." That evening, he sat in his office, unaware of the note waiting downstairs. His laptop screen glowed with transaction alerts, numbers and figures that painted 3 different portraits. One line item read $28,600 at a jewelry store. Another showed $12,400 at a luxury spa. And then there was the last one, $183.50. He stared at the screen, blinking. Groceries, bedding, flowers. It didn't make sense at first. Then slowly it did. A strange silence filled the room. The same card, the same opportunity, yet 3 different hearts had spoken. 2 shouted with greed. 1 whispered with grace. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. The glow from the laptop reflected faintly on his face, softening the sharpness that wealth had carved there. That was when the truth settled in quietly, like dust after a storm. Money had spoken, and love for once had answered. Night fell quietly over the mansion, but his mind refused to rest. The house was too big, too silent, too full of questions that wouldn't stop echoing. He sat alone in his study, the glow from his laptop spilling across the desk. The transaction records were still open, 3 names, 3 totals, 3 stories written in numbers. $28,600 on jewelry, $12,400 on spas, hotels, and luxury brands, and $183.50 on blankets, groceries, and flowers. He read that last line over and over again. A faint smile tugged at his lips, but it wasn't happiness, it was disbelief mixed with shame. He thought of the maid's gentle voice, how she'd looked down at the card like it was something holy. She had called it too much, yet somehow she'd turned it into something pure. He leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. The realization came slowly, like dawn seeping through a curtain. For years, he'd been surrounded by people who said the right words, wore the right smiles, and loved the version of him that signed checks and opened doors to places they could never enter on their own. But none of them had ever seen him not really. Downstairs, the faint scent of fresh flowers drifted into the hall. He followed it quietly, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor until he reached the study table. There, beside a vase of lilies, lay the card untouched except for a folded note. He opened it. The handwriting was small and careful. "Thank you for trusting me. I used it to help others. I hope that makes you proud." His throat tightened. He set the note down gently, staring at the simple flowers she'd bought. They looked out of place on his polished desk, too real, too human for a room built on glass and steel. He sank into the nearest chair, covering his face with his hands. For a long time he didn't move. He wasn't angry, he was humbled. All his life he'd believed that wealth could solve anything, that money could heal loneliness, command loyalty, and maybe even buy love. But now, sitting there with that note in his hand, he understood how wrong he'd been. In another part of the city, laughter echoed from a penthouse suite as champagne glasses clinked. In another, a woman posted pictures from a rooftop pool, her caption glittering with hashtags and emojis. And here, in the quiet of his own home, a single maid had shown him more love than he'd ever received in all his years of luxury. He whispered softly, as though speaking to the empty room, "Kindness doesn't ask for attention. It just acts." A knock came at the door, gentle, hesitant. He wiped his eyes quickly. "Come in," he said. The butler entered, holding a tray. "Dinner, sir?" He shook his head. "No, thank you." When the butler turned to leave, he asked, "Where's Amara?" "She left earlier, sir. Said she was visiting the market again." He nodded slowly. Tell her I saw the note." That night, he stood at the window, staring down at the glittering skyline. The same city lights that once made him feel powerful now looked distant and empty. He realized that power without warmth and wealth without compassion were both kinds of poverty. And for the first time, Daniel Cole, billionaire, businessman, man of status, felt small. But not in a way that hurt. He felt small in the way a man does when he finally understands something bigger than himself. The lesson wasn't in what they bought. It was in what they valued. And somewhere deep inside, he knew his life was about to change forever. The following evening, the mansion came alive again, candles flickering, soft jazz humming through the dining hall, a table set for 4. It looked like an ordinary dinner, but beneath the warm lights, something tense lingered in the air. He had invited them all, the 2 women who had spent like royalty, and the one who had spent with compassion. Tonight, the truth would breathe in open air. The first to arrive came wrapped in glitter and perfume, her laughter filling the room before she even crossed the doorway. She kissed him on the cheek and said, "You've been so quiet lately. Planning something special for me?" He only smiled faintly. "You could say that." The second came moments later, dressed elegantly. Her tone softer but her eyes already measuring the room, the table, the flowers. She took the seat opposite him, smiling politely. "It's been too long. I missed this place." He nodded. "I'm glad you came." And then came the last quietly, almost unnoticed. She slipped into the room wearing a simple cotton dress, her hair tied neatly back. She looked unsure of why she was there at all, pausing at the edge of the table until he gestured for her to sit. "Join us," he said gently. "I wanted all of you here." Dinner began with light conversation, laughter from one side of the table, cautious glances from the other. The clinking of silverware filled the space where honesty refused to speak. He let it go on for a while, watching them, studying every movement, every smile that didn't reach the eyes. Finally, he set down his glass. "I want to thank each of you," he said, his voice calm but deep, "for what you did with the card I gave you." The table went still. He turned first to the woman in red. "I saw what you bought. Jewelry, dresses, things of beauty." She smiled proudly. "Of course. You told me to make myself happy." He nodded. "And you did. You spent $28,600 on happiness." She laughed lightly, unaware of the weight behind his tone. "Well, I have good taste." Then he turned to the one beside her. "And you? You spent $12,400 on luxury spas, hotels, and designer gifts." She met his gaze and shrugged. "You gave me permission. I just wanted to take care of myself." He gave a small smile, the kind that hides pain. You both did exactly what I expected. Then his eyes shifted to the quiet one at the end of the table. And you, he said softly, spent $183.50. Her hands tightened on her lap. Sir, he raised a hand gently. Let me finish. You bought food for the gardener, a blanket for a homeless child, flowers for this table, and left me a note thanking me for trusting you. The room fell silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. The two women exchanged uneasy glances. The one in red gave a sharp laugh. Wait, she used your money on other people? The other joined in. You gave her your card, and she bought groceries? That's adorable. The maid looked down, her cheeks flushing with quiet embarrassment. I'm sorry if I did wrong, she whispered. He turned toward her, his voice steady but soft. You did nothing wrong. You showed me something I forgot existed. The laughter stopped. The women's faces shifted, their confidence cracking under the weight of his words. He stood slowly, his chair scraping softly against the marble. I used to think love could be measured in gifts, in how much someone would spend to show they care. But tonight, I realize it's measured by what someone gives even when they have nothing to gain. He looked at the two women who now sat frozen, faces pale. You both spent my money on yourselves. She spent it on others. And that's the difference between wanting a man and valuing a soul. The room stayed quiet long after he left the table. The laughter that had filled the mansion hours ago was gone, replaced by a silence that cut deeper than any argument. Upstairs, he stood by the window again, staring out at the city. The same lights shimmered below, but they didn't comfort him anymore. He had found what he was looking for, and it broke something inside him. Downstairs, the maid quietly gathered her things and walked to her small room. For her, it wasn't about pride or winning. She had only done what her heart told her was right. But as she sat on the edge of her bed that night, she felt a strange ache, the kind that comes from being too kind in a world that doesn't understand. Rain returned that night, soft and persistent, tapping against the tall windows like a whisper that wouldn't stop. The house was quiet again, too quiet. The laughter from dinner had faded hours ago, leaving behind a silence that pressed on his chest. He walked through the long hallway toward the servants' quarters. Every step echoed like regret. He wasn't sure what he wanted to say, only that he needed to see her. To thank her, maybe, or to tell her that she had reminded him what kindness looked like. Her door was open. A small suitcase sat by the bed, half-packed. She was folding her few clothes neatly, her face calm but distant, like someone who had already made peace with goodbye. He paused at the doorway. You're leaving. She froze for a second, then turned slowly. Yes, sir. I think it's time. He stepped inside, unsure how to stand, how to breathe. Did I do something wrong? She shook her head. No, you've been good to me, but this place, it's not mine. I don't belong here. He took another step forward. You're not leaving because of what happened tonight? Her eyes glistened under the dim light. I didn't mean to embarrass anyone. I just did what I thought was right. But I don't want to stay in a house where my heart feels like a mistake. For a moment he couldn't speak. Her words hit deeper than he expected. I never meant to test you, he said quietly. I just wanted to understand who truly cared. She looked at him for a long time, her expression gentle but sad. And now you do. You found what you were looking for. So let me go before this becomes something it shouldn't. The suitcase handle clicked softly as she closed it. The sound tore something inside him. Please, he said, his voice breaking slightly. Don't go. I can make things right. She smiled faintly. You already did. You showed me that good people still exist. But not every good thing is meant to stay. Then she picked up her small bag and walked past him. The scent of soap and rain followed her as she moved down the hallway, her footsteps slow but steady. He stood there long after she was gone, staring at the empty doorway. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the roof like applause for a tragedy no one else could see. He returned to the living room, where the fire had burned low. The note she left on his desk still lay there, beside the wilted flowers she had bought. He touched the petals, fragile now, their scent fading. For the first time in years, he felt the ache of something money couldn't fix. He could buy diamonds, cars, whole islands if he wished. But not this. Not the quiet, selfless warmth of a heart that had asked for nothing in return. He sat there until the fire died, until dawn began to stretch its pale fingers across the sky. And when the light touched his face, he realized what he had truly lost. It wasn't just a maid. It was the only person who had ever seen him without the mask of wealth. Days passed, but the house did not feel the same. It wasn't just quiet anymore. It was hollow, like something living had been taken from it. Every room echoed with her absence. The scent of soap she always used had faded from the hallways, and even the flowers she once arranged had begun to wilt. He tried to focus on work, on meetings, on numbers, but his mind drifted every few minutes. Her face, her voice, the way she smiled when she spoke gently to the gardeners. It all returned like a song he couldn't stop hearing. He found himself sitting at the dining table one evening, staring at the chair where she used to stand, waiting quietly until everyone else had finished eating. The same question kept haunting him. Where could she have gone? He called his driver and told him to take him to the local market, the one she used to visit every Saturday. The streets there smelled of spice, smoke, and life. It was noisy, messy, full of people bartering and laughing, the kind of place money didn't rule. As he stepped out of the car, a few heads turned. His suit and polished shoes didn't belong here, but he didn't care. He wandered past the fruit stalls until an old man waved to him. "You're looking for someone?" the man said knowingly. He nodded. "A young woman. Works as a maid. Kind eyes. Always buys flowers from this market." The man smiled faintly. "Ah yes, the quiet one. She hasn't come in days. But she bought flowers last week. Said she was visiting the orphanage near the old church." His heart quickened. "Thank you," he whispered, and hurried toward the road. The orphanage stood small and weathered, with walls the color of dust and laughter spilling from its courtyard. Children chased each other barefoot, their voices bright and innocent. He paused by the gate, watching as she appeared from inside, her hair tied back, a basket of fruits in her hand. She didn't see him at first. She was laughing, a sound so light and free that it stopped him where he stood. For a moment he couldn't move. She looked happier here than she ever had in his mansion. When she finally turned and noticed him, her smile faded slightly, replaced by surprise. "Sir." He walked closer, stopping a few feet away. "I've been looking for you." She lowered her gaze. "You shouldn't have. I'm fine." "I know," he said quietly. "But I'm not." The children gathered behind her, watching curiously. He glanced at them, then back at her. "You spent my money to care for others. You could have bought anything, but you chose kindness. I realized I've been rich all my life, yet I never knew what it meant to give." She shifted the basket in her hands, unsure what to say. "You don't owe me anything, sir." He stepped closer. "You're wrong. You gave me something money can't buy, peace." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, from the basket, she pulled a small white rose and handed it to him. "You don't have to thank me," she said softly. "Just don't stop being kind." He took the flower carefully, as though it were made of glass. "Then let me return the kindness," he said. "Not with money, with a promise." She met his eyes. "What promise?" "That I'll spend the rest of my life doing what you taught me, giving meaning to what I have." Her lips curved into a small, trembling smile. The children giggled behind her, tugging at her dress, asking if the rich man was her friend. He looked at them and nodded. "Yes, she's the best friend I've ever had." As the sun dipped behind the church roof, the air turned golden. For the first time in years, his heart felt light. Not because he had gained something, but because he had finally learned how to let go. He knew then that he didn't just want to thank her. He wanted to build something new, not a transaction, not pity, but a life built on understanding. And standing there in that dusty courtyard, surrounded by laughter and humility, he realized that the greatest wealth in the world wasn't in his accounts or his mansion, it was standing right in front of him, holding a basket of fruit and a heart full of grace. Months slipped quietly by after that day at the orphanage. The mansion, once cold and echoing, began to change. Not because of new furniture or art or luxury, but because of laughter, of life returning to its walls. He visited the orphanage often, sometimes alone, sometimes bringing supplies for the children. What had started as a gesture of gratitude became a habit, then something more, a calling that softened every edge of his heart. The woman who once dusted his bookshelves now stood beside him in every visit, her presence calm, steady, and full of light. She never asked for anything. She never expected anything. She only gave her time, her patience, her care. One quiet evening, as the sun sank behind the horizon and painted the sky gold, he took her to the old garden behind his house, the one she used to tend silently every morning before anyone else woke. The flowers she planted months ago had bloomed again, stronger and brighter than before. He turned to her, his voice gentle. "Do you remember what you told me at the orphanage?" She looked up, puzzled. "What did I say?" He smiled. "You told me not to stop being kind." She lowered her gaze shyly. "I did." He took her hand slowly, careful not to startle her. "I didn't stop, but I also realized that kindness isn't complete unless you share it with someone who understands it. You made me understand it." For a long moment, neither spoke. The evening breeze rustled through the flowers, carrying the scent of jasmine and rain. When she finally looked at him, there was warmth in her eyes, not the surprise of someone given a gift, but the quiet recognition of someone finally seen. The wedding that followed months later was simple. No ballroom, no orchestra, no press. Just a small ceremony beneath the old tree at the orphanage, surrounded by children laughing and clapping with joy. She wore a plain white dress. He wore a suit without the shine of wealth. And when they exchanged vows, his voice trembled as he said, "You gave me back my soul." Afterward, they sat together beneath the same tree, watching the children play. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, falling across their hands where his wedding band gleamed beside hers. He turned slightly, speaking not to her, but to the quiet air, to himself, to the world. People think love is about finding someone beautiful, someone perfect. But love, real love, is finding someone good. Someone who chooses you even when you have nothing left to give. She leaned her head gently against his shoulder. "And when you give love," she whispered, "you never lose it. It always finds its way back." The wind stirred the flowers. Somewhere a child laughed. The sound carried softly into the fading light. He smiled. Not the polished smile he wore for cameras or deals, but a true, unguarded one. For the first time, he didn't feel like a billionaire trying to buy love. He felt like a man who had finally earned it. Later that night, when they returned home, the black credit card, the same one that had started everything, sat locked away in his desk. On the wall above it hung a single framed photograph. Him, her, and the children from the orphanage. Below it, her note was still there. "Thank you for trusting me." He never removed it, because that note, more than any contract, any diamond, or any fortune, held the truth of his entire life. We've come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.